building relationships across the organization is critical for product operations in general, right? But the HR initiatives, getting people involved, creating an environment, creating a house that we all want to live in is really where great product work can happen.
Hello and welcome to the Product Ops Chronicles with myself, Graham Reed, and my co-host, Product Ops pal, Antonia Landi. Welcome back, Antonia.
Hello.
And today we are joined by Jana Debusk. Jana, let me hand over to you for a quick introduction.
Sure. So yes, my name is Jana Debusk. I am currently leading the product operations at Playvox by NICE. I've been there about 3.5 years now, and I've been really lucky to kind of learn the craft while doing. I work with an awesome product team. They've taught me a lot, and I've also had the opportunity to learn from great product minds from all over the world by absorbing podcasts just like this. So I really appreciate this space. Like many people in product, I came into this field from a very winding road of experiences. Pre-Prod Ops, I was a professional musician and an actress, a college professor, and a travel writer. And then in Playvox, I started as a technical writer, moved on to product communications manager, and then product operations. So I am obsessed with communication. I think it is critical. All forms of communication, whether that's, words, art, music, stage presence. I love all of it. And I love getting people together in a room and the epiphanies that kind of come when people are really authentically talking to each other and communicating. I've learned so much just by being in these kinds of rooms. And so facilitating that in a prod ops space is really special to me. I'm excited to do that in my day job, and I also love doing it outside of it. So I am the organizer of Fort Wayne Women in Tech here where I live, and I am a new Pendo user group leader. I'm the mother of a very curious and hilarious 5-year-old, and I am still a professional musician. So what happened to kind of inspire this topic that we're about to dive into is that Playvox was recently acquired by a company called NICE. And so Playvox by NICE is now this line of business within the larger organization. So overnight, we went from a company, a startup of 200 or less people into 9,000. And so it was a shift, to be sure. And just this is the first time I'd experienced that, going through it, kind of noting what I was looking at, what I was feeling, what my team was feeling, and how to kind of navigate that in this new space was really what brought me to this.
Awesome. I've got to be honest with you, I almost want to scrap today's podcast. I want to talk to you about your being an actress and a musician and everything behind that. That's fantastic to start off with. Yeah, and you talk about your passions of communication, in terms of the role certainly that we do, and you've got kindred spirits here. Absolutely, we absolutely love talking about and talk about good communication practices and good cultures. Yeah, within that, and moving on to today, absolutely segues beautifully into that. We're going to talk about the role of providing or certainly starting to build up a good culture, with product ops, but also then providing maintenance to the culture that product ops then sets up, or in place of, or in a place that is now shifted. Your internal teams have been working together well, using processes and ways of working, and this has improved satisfaction and effectiveness. Fantastic. Absolutely has happened with you. Now comes an acquisition, or in other businesses there's a layoff round, big legislative or regulatory changes. What happens to processes? What happens to that working culture? And what can product operations do about this? Perhaps it's not even a big event, a big shift and a big change, but rather we're going to talk about the need for constant monitoring, maintenance, almost smiling for the teams to see that morale boosting almost as well, alongside those product leaders and leadership as a whole around the business, what we hope that they will also be doing at times as well. And with that, how much of that sits with product operations? So Danny, it's your opening pitch here, you know, and you've started to explain a little bit more about your own situation. Talk to me about your thoughts on kind of community and culture within, and what product operations has to do with that.
Yeah. So, obviously the role of product operations is incredibly different in each company and for each business, case. But what I think is a common thread is that we are these connectors and we are these facilitators for our product team, but also for our broader team, right? And so I think it's crucial that we are a part of building community and maintaining community and culture within our companies. I think that's a crucial aspect of our role. I do not think it is our sole responsibility. And I think that is something to be firm about. We always talk about frameworks quite often and templates and, doing things like that. But I think it's also important to think about the framework as kind of a boundary in that sense. So not just frameworks for processes, but frameworks for what are we responsible for? So I think that in situations like this, if we are the instigators for something to shift and change within the way that we're currently working, that's absolutely like par for the course. But I think that it needs to be in collaboration and deep collaboration with HR teams and leadership and product and possibly IT. Like there's a lot of different people and departments that can come into this. So, yeah.
Yeah, I find this topic in general just very interesting because I've always very much seen product ops as enablers and facilitators of community, and I think of how we live culture, right? So I was speaking at the Product-Led Summit yesterday in Berlin, and there was a talk on experimentation, which I loved, and part of that was, well, if you want to have an experimentation culture, you need it to be easy for teams to experiment, right? And that is such a wonderful link to the things you say, the values you want to have and you want to live, but then actually product ops can facilitate you living those values, right? I think that's an incredibly direct link that you can't do very often in other aspects when it comes to company culture or team culture. But I also really resonate with what you said about it not being the sole responsibility of product ops. I've done community work for internal communities of practice as a product ops person, but the idea behind this is always that you facilitate this kind of work, right? You are not the community manager. You make sure that people can create events, for example. They can get external speakers, right? The last thing we want to do is sort of turn ourselves into the de facto community manager and project manager for company events. That's not what we're trying to aim for, right? We're trying to make sure that that kind of work comes easy for everybody.
Right. And I would also like add on to that if we were to take all that in, where would that leave us as good facilitators, right? Like it's like you can't pour from an empty cup kind of thing. You need to prevent burnout in yourself and in your department as well. And it's very easy to do, to be like, I got that, I can do that. Sure, we can do this, especially in facilitator roles, I believe. People look to us as that kind of person, but it's up to us really to hold those boundaries firm and say, you know what, I'm not going to do all of this, but what I can do is give you an educational video and you can share this with your team and set that up. And I'm so happy to do that for you, right? Or point you to the resources that are going to get you there, because education is more empowering anyways, right? Like, so I think it's exactly that, Antonia.
I'll just come back to piece Antonia just saying about experimentation, because I think that's a perfect example. You know, so many businesses want to say, well, we do experimentation, but that firstly, that's fine, even if that's true. But let's say that you are a business that says, we want to experiment more, that's whether because they want to do it for the right reasons or not, that's what they want to do. But it's absolutely 100% Product Ops 101. They want to do that. But how do you roll that out?
Exactly.
From a technical perspective, there's a whole host of elements to doing that. But now you've also got to enable that culture. You've got to change, there's change management there. You're embedding new ways of thinking and working for those people that are going to be building and monitoring, maintaining those experiments, having that mindset of the experimentation and the impact that can or may have on their productivity, on the customers themselves, on what their expectations are. So just saying that this is something that we want to do and roll out, okay, those are words. But now we've actually got to go and do it. And this is Product Ops 101. And I think we on not only on this podcast, but in Product Ops and product in general, we talk a lot about, what are the steps to doing this? What are the physical process steps to rolling out any new initiative? And it always then ends up coming back to the people. How are those people going to, deal with that changing mindset? How do we introduce this to them? How do we maintain? We're coming back to our topic today. How do we maintain that? How do we tweak that over a period of time to get the best out of them? And I think resoundingly, I think the answer typically, or certainly from my perspective, always is well, there is no one answer to this. It's very specific on the people. It's very specific on the existing culture, whatever that may be within the business.
Yeah, but I think that's also the reason why product ops, it's so strong when there's a period of transformation, right? Whether that's an external factor like an acquisition, like God forbid a layoff, or an internal decision to become more XYZ, whether it's more product-led, more experimentation focused, more data-driven, right? Another huge one, company saying, yeah, we are data-driven. And simply that all the pretense falling apart when you start investigating how often on average a PM actually looks at the dashboard, right? But I think that's why during these times of, you might call it turmoil, right? That's when we can thrive, because that's when we can start saying, okay, good, we've identified a goal, right? We want to be more this. Right now, it's a time of change. Let's make sure we change in line with that particular goal.
Yeah, exactly.
Jana, what's been your experience? And I'm very, very conscious. You're obviously where you're working and things you can and can't or don't want to say and things like that. But kind of what's been your experience here from that? I think you said 200 odd people, I think, at Playvox, and then you've gone into kind of 6,000. So what has been your experience in terms of that cultural shift before potentially you've even kind of then set about that task of improving and changes and things like that?
Sure. Yeah, I think that, I mean, I think we were in the same virtual meetup, Graham, when this was discussed, but somebody else in the room said, when there is such a big change like this, you have to change your identity. And that is massive, right? So you go from the identity of I work here, I do this, and shift it. And anytime you make such a large shift, these shifts are every day. They happen in our lives, they happen in our work, and we can't change them or stop them. So when we were acquired, I was actually surprised how shook I was, because really I think of myself as this very self-aware, I can handle change. I love change, iterate. Yes, let's go. And then when it actually happened, I was like, whoa, wait. So we have to do our business as usual, which of course was massive, and learn not only a new culture and a new product, but also, where do I change my address? Where do I find, who do I talk to about my benefits now? Like simple things that are all of a sudden very confusing. And then of course, onboarding for new companies. And I had to really take a step back. I noticed for myself that I was feeling a lot of feelings, and I had to center myself. I had to ground. You know, it's something that's very common in meditation, but I find it's pretty crucial for any big shifts in business and in work as well. Breathe, connect with the earth, figure out first, like, what is happening here in myself. And then I can be a more resonant leader for the people around me. And so I think that was really my first step with this, is like realizing, oh, this is actually bigger than I thought it was. People talk about it all the time, right? Like, but when it happens to you, then all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, let's take stock of this and notice, how am I processing this shift? Am I getting in my own way? Maybe my teammates are also getting in their own way. And so now I can facilitate better if I first listen to myself. And that's kind of how I started with it.
Yeah, very interesting. I think it's almost like moving to a new country, right? Like it's really that kind of, you're being uprooted kind of against your will, even if you don't have any specific hard feelings, right, about the change. But it's like, well, I didn't consciously specifically seek out this particular change, right? I think it reminds me of my very first product ops job. We kind of had the mandate to get a bunch of loosely connected brands that were all doing the same thing around Europe to start acting and working as one company, right? So we had one brand in Germany, two in France, one in Belgium, and then some smaller stakes elsewhere in Europe. And all of a sudden, we had all these competing and conflicting ideas of how to do good product, right? And there was somebody in France going, well, this is our OKR process and we think it's brilliant. We've been working on iterating this for years and this is the conclusion we've come to. And we got somebody else in Germany going, well, actually, we're not even sure OKRs are the right way to go. And this is the thing we've come up with. And it was really down to the smallest sort of dictionary changes, right? Do you use client or customer or user, right? And all of these things. And suddenly you have to come up with a common language. You have to come up with a common understanding of what we altogether now redefine as good. And it's a momentous change.
For sure.
There's a piece I really want to come back to. Sorry, Jana. There's a piece I really want to come back to just on what you said about making sure that you're grounded. You're helping yourself before helping others. So absolutely massive overlap with mental health support. In fact, actually, not mental health support. It's supporting others, in any way, shape, or form on a very personal level. You need to make sure that you're safe first. If you are not healthy, if you are not able, you can't help other people. You do need to look after yourself first, make sure you are capable first before trying to help others. And it absolutely rings true here as well. In your situation, if you are not comfortable with your own direction, what you're trying to put out to others, your own understanding of the situation you have now found yourself in. And of course, a lot of what we've talked about so far is these big changes. In your case, the acquisition, in many others, it will be layoffs and bits and pieces like that, which has happened a lot over the last few years. Until you get comfortable with your own situation, it's almost impossible for you to be supporting others just in their day job, without even talking about kind of setting that culture, maintaining that culture, actually just on those day-to-day things, everything that Antonia, you were just talking about there. Those are all very important things to do, but actually if you yourself are in turmoil, you can't even attack those other bits and pieces as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's like when you go on a flight, right? Like you have to put the mask on yourself first.
Yeah.
Which is like really conflicting to what I think is a natural state of what we want to do. And I think that personally, for myself, I really started to realize this deep conflict that is a constant process. It's a constant, you have to constantly be aware of it and work through it. Actually, personally, when I became a mother, and so the idea in a flight that I would put my mask on before I put a mask on my child, like, are you kidding me? But at the same time, this is what we have to face every day. And that is a very dramatic, example. But still, like this is the kind of situation that we move through when we have changes, or we'll talk about maintenance probably a little bit later on, but especially with these big changes, I think it's crucial.
What you spoke at the start in your kind of your pitch about, having good relationships with kind of key departments around the business. One in particular that I've long maintained that there is a very close relationship with is kind of the HR team. So much of what we actually do in product operations is about the people. Is about people.
Absolutely.
It's about culture. It's about communication. It's about how they work. It's about behaviors, and there is a lot of overlap with kind of the people team, the HR team, as well. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Sure. I think that, yes, I think that it's crucial. I think that this is one of those things that I believe is very different in every company, whether or not that, like how big that connection is, right? In my case, I would say that building relationships across the organization is critical for product operations in general, right? But the HR initiatives, getting people involved, creating an environment, creating a house that we all want to live in is really where great product work can happen. If we don't build this house with an inquisitive and hopeful environment and engaging our stakeholders, our broader team, we're not going to get anything done. I mean, it's like a, collaborative effort, right? So, I was really active in our Slack channels when we used to have Slack. There were these like workout channels and music channels and just human non-work channels, which especially I think for remote environments is key. I mean, we are an organization made up of humans. Let's realize that and treat each other like humans. Like, what are you into? What do you do outside of work? Because we spend so much of our time at work. If we take out that human aspect that, HR excels at, then what are we doing? Like, what's the point?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think, and honestly, I think quite a number of people who end up in product ops can probably resonate with this. But since almost the beginning of my career, and I've moved companies a lot. Every single place I went to, like day 2, I created a pets channel, because I want to have that kind of relationship with the people I work with, because we are in each other's lives 5 days a week, right? Minimum of 8 hours a day. And people always talk about bringing their whole self to work. And I think to me, that's what that means. And I absolutely appreciate and understand that that's not everybody's default. Not everybody wants to do that. Some people just want to go to work, do work, and leave. Completely respect that. But if there are people that want to have that kind of closeness with others, especially in a remote environment, like you say, then I think this is also, it sounds silly, but this is important, right? Like, show me your dogs, like show me the nice sunsets on the walk home, like things like that, because it's all part of who we are at the end of the day. And I think this is also something that, from a business perspective, it does increase trust in each other, right? If I feel like I know you as a person and I know I can trust you. I know, your personality and what you're like. I'm more likely to resolve conflicts amicably, right? Even if we are remote and we can't just go into a room together and have a quick chat.
I think we found a title for this episode, by the way. Show me your dogs. Dial this back a little bit, long before remote was even cool. Majority of us were at least hybrid, if not full-time in the office. So what was happening? Very naturally we were having these sorts of conversations that were not directly work related. We were not, and we're tangenting a little bit, but we're not in this ideal that Amazon seems to want to put in, that everybody's going to come in and we're going to give 8 hours of pure work and pure innovation and things like that, because that just doesn't happen. We don't constantly innovate, and we're not just talking about things on Amazon, that are innovating left, right and center. We are having these much more personal conversations. We are talking about what happened at the weekend. How's our kids getting on at school? What are our pets? Where are we going on holiday? All those bits and pieces, because as humans, we seek out community, we seek out connectivity. And this absolutely does bring us back to one of the fundamental pieces of what we're talking about today, which is how are we building that community? How are we building that culture? Or sort of rather, how are we maintaining that culture? And a part of that is making sure that we are facilitating great conversation, not necessarily the conversations that are purely work-based or innovation-based or process-based, but actually, are we just facilitating the ability for people to communicate whatever they want to be communicating? And Antonia, you're absolutely right in what you said there. That's not necessarily for everybody. People will want to come into work, just do a day's work and go home. They won't want to get involved in personal conversations. Perfectly fine. That happened when we were all in the office. That happens when we're remote. That happens in both now. But crucial to what Product Ops is we're facilitating the option of the good conversations and community and collaboration to happen. What that communication actually is, what that collaboration actually turns out to be, almost isn't, with the best will in the world, isn't our problem. What we are doing is we're making sure that there is every opportunity for these things to happen, and 99% of the time people do take those up, and that community forms, that collaboration forms, that trust absolutely really does start to form. But we're providing in product operations those options, the ability for those options to just occur.
Yeah, and I think honestly, also just to bring it very much back to, because I think what we're talking about is great for the people that resonate with it to begin with, but the skeptics are always like, well, what's the return of investment on this? And honestly, the return on investment is that people will want to keep working at your company. Attrition is a huge, huge problem. And you can do like simple things like, oh, we are a learning culture. We are invested in your career and we want to make sure that you grow. Okay, give me a budget and tell me how to spend that budget. Make it easy for me to go to conferences, to attend a course, to pay for a newsletter or a book that I'm really, really interested in, right? And these are exactly the tangible, operational, on-the-ground things that we can facilitate so that when you say you have a learning culture, you can actually back that up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely agree. And I think, Jana, so we're talking amongst ourselves here. Get back to you, obviously, as the guest in a moment. But I think this is an important piece, and I think particularly for anybody that is watching that may not be, as you said, that are bought into product operations or bought into, this idea of good positive culture that we're talking about. With no disrespect to anybody, is you can be quite inventive with this. You don't have to throw money at these things either. And a great example that I had at one business was I didn't enjoy my time at this business in particular, and I was only there for a short time, but actually they had one really good takeaway that I took, and they dedicated, it was at least an hour, it might have been 2 hours a week, and that was your personal learning space. Learning as in something to do that ultimately benefits you, your career, ultimately the business as well. But you know what? This was time that was ring fenced, no working. I was working very closely with the engineering team. So it wasn't, you're not doing coding in that time. If you want to go and learn about new ways of coding or new language or something like that, perfectly fine to do it, but you're not working on that. It didn't fundamentally cost anything extra, other than obviously you're not doing work in that time, but it was really, really productive. People were really coming back with some really great learning. They were sharing it with the group on a diverse range of topics. And it was a genuinely fun thing to do. It got us all really engaged. There was some great learning that came out of it. It didn't cost anything. And I think part of this is being quite innovative of what you can do, particularly if you are limited on budget spend or people of availability and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that it ties into this conversation quite well because, you know, speaking of, in my particular case, we went from Slack to Teams, right? Nobody knew how to do Teams. It's still like, what is Teams? And it was a big learning curve that I was able to facilitate some transfer of knowledge, right? Like some pieces that I got from ChatGPT, honestly. I was like, how do you do this in Teams? And then you figured it out. And so I was able to build some basic communication channels on Teams. We started doing the work part of it. We were on this new thing, we were doing the work. And then I realized this is not feeling the same. And we're not working the same because we don't have those human channels where we can just say, what are you listening to? Like post a picture, do a challenge, like let's get together and gamify something and have some fun. And so once those channels were added in, recognition, that is a huge, huge piece of this, right? Like if you are going through a transition, or if you're feeling stale, right? Like you've done this thing for so long, what can we do to really spark innovation and collaboration? And that is highlighting these quick wins, highlighting your teammates when they do something awesome, even if it's like, small. Even small things are huge. And giving a voice to that in a shared space, in a community, encourages other people to do the same. So it's just like, it was so crucial to build those human channels into the Teams, space, for our example. And people started talking, and it was like, oh wait, this feels better, and I think that it was widespread through the company, like these channels matter.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I have that same feeling so often, and I think part of that is also just it takes courage. Honestly, it takes courage to be that person that creates those channels, to say, I think this fluffy thing is important enough to have a space in our, in our business, in our team's space, in our Slack, whatever it is. And to be that first person, that kind of trailblazer that opens themselves up and say, hey, this is my cat. Or, like I baked a sourdough loaf at the weekend. I thought that was really cool. It actually does take courage, right? And I think so often people just wait for somebody else to do it,
Absolutely.
People might think like, yeah, it would be nice to bring more of myself to work, but it's a work environment. It's not a play environment. And I think we're starting to kind of break those barriers down a little bit, but I think especially the larger the organization is, right, the harder it becomes to sort of step up and say, I actually think this is really important. And I think this is something that we tend to lose as companies grow in scale. And in the beginning, it does really feel like, if not family, like a close group of friends, right? And then all of a sudden, yeah, you're at 5,000, 6,000 people, and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is appropriate anymore.
Right. And I tend to use a lot of GIFs, which, some people
Same.
think are not professional, but I disagree. I think they're an incredibly useful form of communication. And if we're going to talk about all the forms of communication, humans like to laugh. They do. And I think that laughter connects us so deeply, and it motivates us to do good work. So, for the naysayers of GIFs and cat channels, do they not like laughter? I just I can't imagine. So yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but that's
No, interestingly, it brings us on to a really interesting thought here, and I'd really like everybody's opinion on this. I'm just going to put this out there because, and to the people that are watching that may be kind of skeptical of kind of this idea, because what have we talked about kind of for the last 20 minutes? Having Teams channels or Slack channels, whichever your poison is, you know, that talk about cats and bits and pieces like that. But you know, and you might be looking at this and going, is that all the advice that this podcast is going to offer? You know, that sort of thing. But actually, no. That's one pure, but very one small example of we're trying to build much more human connections, not being very robotic. We're only going to have Slack or Teams talking about, you know, customers and tech and HR problems and whatever else. You know, we are having that. This is our form of communication, and whether you are remote, hybrid, all in the office or anything else like that, you are still a diverse group of people. And actually, if we then go into kind of individuals' preferences, you know, you will have people that will communicate a lot better on Teams and Slack or email than they will do being able to have those sorts of conversations as well. So what you're now building with what is conceptually cat channels, or, you know, what did you bake over the weekend and things like that, you are building an ability for a diverse range of people to communicate on a level playing field. And I'll be honest with you, that is very, very difficult to do in you know, in many other ways, in many other businesses. So actually, I think that by just doing these potentially very, very simple things, you are opening the business up, your business up, to doing a lot more. The piece that is very interesting is this product operations. Yes, and fundamentally the answer is yes to a point. But counter to that is, why are business leaders, or even the product leadership, just in you know, to scale it down a bit, not looking at this as well? Why is this in some respects being left to product operations to do? And Antonia, you said it absolutely right. You know, it's stepping up, it's being brave, it's taking that initiative. But is it are leadership waiting for somebody to take this up? Have they not thought about this before? Or, you know, is leadership actually that much against it and it needs real fighting and battering, you know, a battering ram to make this happen? I'm curious as to what your thoughts are on this.
So I think, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think anybody thinks about this as deliberately as I do or we might do.
Yeah.
And I think there is just a general sense of, yeah, I mean, it's okay, I guess, but we don't really know each other, but we get work done, so it's fine. You know, there's just a general sense of something's missing, but people can rarely really point it out, right? I think people rarely stop to think, well, hang on, I don't know anything about you. I don't know, you know, I don't know what kind of person you are. Like, our relationship is purely transactional, right? I think that's a big one. So I think I don't think it comes with any ill intent that people are actively saying, no, I'm not going to do that. That's somebody else's job. Or no, I'm not going to do that. It's useless. There's absolutely no value behind it. But I think in a long list of priorities, this falls down the wayside like so quickly and so often. And to a certain extent, you also need people to keep these sorts of initiatives alive, right? Like, creating the channel is step one, but then you need other people to contribute to it, right? And I think it all reflects back down to finding your tribe, actually. And I think this is exactly why initiatives like these are much more valuable in large organizations that are distributed like across time zones, across countries, across continents even, right, to really say, we want to make an active effort to understand who the people in an organization are, what they care about. And then suddenly you might be speaking to somebody in customer success about your latest crochet project, you know? And that's another way of breaking down silos. And I'm so serious about this, That's the easiest way of understanding what another human in your organization does.
Absolutely. And you send the right GIF after that conversation, and you guys are best friends
You're
now. Like,
locked
this
in,
is
absolutely.
stakeholder buy-in complete, like whatever. No, I absolutely agree. Antonia, you said something about prioritization for product leaders, and I would say I would agree completely. It's, in my experience, I don't have all the experience in the world, but in my personal experience, it's not that they don't support it. They do think it's important. They do see the value of this. That's another reason why they have product operations in their company, right? But on the priorities that they have, this is down the list. But as it applies to product operations specifically, creating these frameworks and these ways of working and maintaining them and iterating on them when things change is at the core of what we do with this facilitation, right? So frameworks don't just apply to the processes that product has, right, to make the products. The framework expands, I think, into the entire company, where we can build a framework of safety and communication. And from that framework, people can do great things, right? So it's this like hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't know who's familiar with that, but I'm a little obsessed with that kind of stuff. But psychological safety, massively important, right? Creating a sense of belonging, massively important. And from there, we go up the ladder to this like self-actualization, like realizing the best part of yourself and what you can then contribute to the business, to the company's goals, and collaborate. So I do think it's extremely fundamental, even if it sounds wooey and silly, it's absolutely crucial.
I think we actually answered this question. So the question that I sort of asked is this a product ops, I won't say problem, but initiative, let's call this. And Antonia, you actually said this straight off. It's small fish. It's small fry. It's why is this not in the smaller scale product leadership to deal with? Because actually there's more important things as bigger priorities potentially to be focusing on. We could argue about that another time, whether it is a priority or not. But the fact is as well, why does product ops tend to exist over the fact of this continuing argument? Well, why is product leadership not doing all of these bits and pieces? Why are they not rolling out these initiatives? Why are they not? Because they don't have the time quite often. They don't have the time, they don't have the capacity. And this absolutely falls in line with that. There is not necessarily the right amount of time to do this properly, to take this seriously, to roll out this culture, these channels, these talking points, these non-work areas, because they're not necessarily a huge priority for leadership to get involved with. So product operations is there to, if you like, delegate down, if you better to do the logistics of rolling these things out properly. And we've also said it here as well, maintain these channels. It's great to set all these channels up in these initiatives, the praise, the feedback piece we were talking about earlier as well. Great to set these things up. Pointless if nobody's using it. And we don't have this maintenance to remind people to use it, this push for people to use it. We see so much when we do this job in product operations, quite often we're having to continually evangelize what we're doing, whether it's a process and a way of working or a new form to go and use, or if it's something like this. It needs that push and that maintenance, at least until it becomes an embedded way of working for everybody else in at least the department, if not the wider business as well. So I think actually we've actually answered this question. It does fall to product operations to take this on, because the people that arguably should be doing it, if we want to use that, don't have the capacity.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting once you lay everything out, right? Product operations, I think it's fair to say that we are there to make the product organization as effective as possible. I think that's something that everybody can agree with, right? Break it down. We want people to stay. We want people to do a good job, or ideally we want them to do a better job than they did yesterday. And we want them to feel safe enough to push the boat out and to innovate. All of these things we just talked about are in line with those three things. And those are very tangible, mission critical, right? Like business critical things that senior leadership should be thinking about. And it's the same as with product ops itself. They need to make sure this stuff happens. They don't need to be doing it themselves.
Right. Right. Yes, I think that the communication piece is critical, and then moving forward with that, like you touched on, Graham, is like maintaining that. So consistent communication. Once it's laid out, if it just sits there, then it sits there, and it's going to peter out. It's like anything, right? So maintaining this true consistent communication throughout, if you're in a relationship and you don't talk to your partner, how's that going to work? Like, it's like any other human relationship. Like I keep going back to, we are an organization of humans. If we interact with each other, we have a relationship. It's different types of relationships, but these are all relationships. And the way to get things done is by maintaining that relationship. So I do think it's a critical part of product operations, like you were saying, Antonia.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think of product ops as it's one of the most human-centered roles, right? Like we are constantly going to people, trying to understand their environment, trying to understand how they work, trying to understand their challenges, and then eventually trying to get them to change, right? That's a huge ask. We can't just do that with people who we've never really spent time with, right? They're not gonna tell us what's really bothering them if they don't think they can trust us or they feel safe, at least to a certain extent. So it is actually mission critical to our role to finding those huge gaps in our organization that hold us back. And again, it's such a human-centered role, and you hit the nail on the head, right? Relationships are crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. The last piece I just want to kind of just touch on just a little bit more, I think, is about this concept of maintaining. We've spent, rightly so, a lot of time talking about kind of some initiatives that we can roll out, and there are huge amounts more. We could list lots of great initiatives that we've all done in our businesses or we've seen in other businesses and things like that. But ultimately, to the people that are watching you need to find these things for yourself, much of product operations. But there's also that element of maintenance as well, and something that comes to my mind when I think about the maintenance of kind of culture and things like that is being almost a little bit smiley about things. Maybe particularly when I think things maybe not going quite so well. Sometimes I think our role is a little bit to put almost a smile on for the benefit of others. We're looking at morale, and if, as we said on so much today, if we don't do it, then nobody else will. So I think it does fall back to us again, as much as it might do to leadership, and line managers and people like that, to go, look, we have to, for the benefit of the troops, we have to keep their morale up when things aren't going quite so well. When you've gone through a round of layoffs, when you have gone through an acquisition, and it's very, very confusing, it's very worrying, very scary times, people don't know what the future is. We have to try to keep maintaining that culture as best as possible, maintain that stability. And you know what? Sometimes that does mean we need to jump on those conversations, into those cat channels, into our baking channels, into our book channels, music channels, and stir up some conversation. If it's gone stale, let's reinvigorate it. Let's put some things out there, put a bit of ourselves in that, which quite often is the case. I'll tell a bit of myself in there. What did I do the weekend, or what trouble am I having, or my cat did this, or whatever, to stimulate others, break that ice a little bit. And I think that's some of the maintenance that is required here as well. It's not tweaking and changing and refining. It's actually just getting people to come back to the table and be part of the conversation again.
Yeah, and I would also say that, like, I think there's a balance here, right? Like there's the human interaction and the channels that we've been talking about. And there's also the hard conversations that we have to acknowledge, right? Like, we don't have to harp on it. We don't have to live there, but we do have to acknowledge it. This is hard, right? It's okay if you're feeling feelings, because this is a hard thing. Or if you're feeling stale, or if you're feeling whatever it is that might be happening, those also need to be acknowledged, right? So I think it's a crucial balance of acknowledging the hardships and showing how to move through it with humor, with connection. And I think that is a critical part of product operations.
Yeah, I completely agree. And interestingly, I think there is that balance, it's finding that right balance as well in what you've just said, that we do have to acknowledge that, you know, something has happened or there's tough times or whatever. But finding that balance also to continuity, that life is still going on, and people do thrive. Many people do thrive on that continuity, even in small elements. So I think actually, then again, comes back to what I said as well, which is when there is those tough times, making sure people do know that we can talk about this, that it's okay to not to feel great, that it is troubling you, your productivity, let's face it, might well be down because it is on your mind. That's natural, and that's going to happen. And if anything, that's more directed at leadership to kind of say, look, you can't throw this grenade into the middle of our business, whether it's positive or not, and expect everybody to just, right, next day we are back to exactly as we were. It's going to play on people's minds. So what can we do to smooth that road just a little bit with continuing conversations, with channels and opportunities for things that were happening before and will continue happening, probably largely the same as they were again after this event has happened.
And also, like, I'm sorry to
No,
interrupt.
I'm done.
Also, you know, what have you learned? That's a huge part of these hard transitions, right? Is refocusing. Yeah, that was hard. What skills do we have now that we didn't have before? And how can we use those to benefit our lives in the business? So I think that the education part of it, and kind of refocusing or reframing and constantly communicating about that is also a piece of this.
Yeah, I think it also really goes back to being that human, right? Because oftentimes senior leadership doesn't really have that luxury, or sometimes they might feel like they don't have that luxury of being kind of that amount of vulnerable, right? Of being able to go up there and say, yeah, this kind of sucks temporarily, but it will get better. And I think sometimes we do have that luxury because we don't have any direct reports, or, you know, nobody in the product team reports to us anyway. So we can get candid, right? And say, yeah, this is kind of put a spanner in the works, but, you know, like, we'll address it as we have in the past, and we'll work through it, and we'll get better at it. And I think it is just bringing back that human element into business to actually leave room for those conflicting feelings and leave room for almost the kind of grief, right, you have from the thing you're leaving behind, actually.
Does it provide a bit of a level playing field for everybody as well, management and IC? You know, when you've got these channels and conversations and spaces and things like that to enhance that culture, does it provide that level playing field for, you know, senior leaders, middle management, ICs on the ground to interact as peers rather than as you know, reports?
For
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Go
go ahead,
ahead.
I was just going to say, as you know, as things shift, whether it be layoffs or acquisitions or what have you, sometimes the roles shift too. Like, sometimes it's not just about the level playing field, but it's also about changing playing fields, right? So I think that everybody has gone through this similar experience, and we all now have to figure out how to move through it together. So I think it's a great thing to take away, and a positive feature of these big changes.
Yeah, I think it does open up an interesting conversation though, because I think this is heavily company culture dependent. And I remember stepping into sort of leadership roles, and I'm the kind of person that if Halloween is on a weekday, like I will be in costume in the office, like that kind of stuff. And then stepping into leadership, and then me questioning myself, saying, well, is this appropriate now? Is this how a leader would act? Right. And I think not having many of those kinds of role models is actually genuinely a problem, because we are closing the door to a more human leadership, right? I would love for a leader to be able to say, yeah, this sucks. I'm aware it sucks, but we'll move through it. And this is how, right? Instead of this sort of politics style talking a lot without really saying anything, right? But to a certain extent, leadership is something very rigid in our mind. And I, for one, would really welcome different leadership styles, different styles of sort of human interaction between hierarchies. And yes, of course, we all have our own comfort level with that, right? And we're all our own humans. We don't want to share everything, of course. But I think the way leadership is represented at the moment, it makes people question whether they have a place in that, right? Or whether their place is in being an IC and being able to be fully themselves. I think these sorts of initiatives that open that field a little bit more are quite important to that change as well.
I couldn't agree more. And for everybody watching, our next episode, Antonia is going to be in fancy dress, apparently. So tune in for that one. We are at time, and I think that's an absolutely fantastic place for us to stop as well, to really kind of just take away and think about that leadership, how accessible leadership is, even if kind of mentally speaking, is that a place that people want to get to? Is there a dividing culture almost between, I see people moving into leadership, and actually is that a divide that people want to traverse as well? I think that's a fantastic thought to take away. But I hope everybody has enjoyed what we've talked about today. So thank you as always to my co-host Antonia, Landi, and to our very special guest today, Jana. Thank you so much for joining us. Brilliant conversation piece today.
Thank you for having me. This was so great. I loved it.
Thank you. Please do connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Thanks as ever to our friends at the Product Led Alliance for facilitating this ongoing series. Thank you to yourselves for watching today, and we really do look forward to welcoming you on the next episode of Product Ops Chronicles. Thank you, everybody.